Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking podcast. I am your host, repeatedly dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what happened to me. And that's how I got the name Repeatedly Dead Fred. And as I discussed with our guest prior to hitting the record button, I'm currently not dead. So that's a good thing. We have Philippa Cranston Baran. Is that correct?
Baran?
Baran. And she is an amazing woman in her own right. She's also the sister of the late Canadian icon, Taller Cranston. So I'm guessing he was taller than you. Has
He
anybody
no,
ever asked you?
he was not only not taller, he was a little bit shorter. He wasn't tall. He seemed to have inner bigness, and of course, most of the world saw him on skates, which gave him an extra few inches. But he
Mhm,
was, in fact, 3 years younger than me.
mhm. So, okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the book you wrote about your brother, and then we'll talk about some of your own projects because you've got a pretty fascinating history yourself. Some might call you the goat.
I don't know. I aspire to being the goat. And if owning goats and running a dairy goat farm and having the arrogance to think that one could actually build a goat dairy and pasteurize milk and make ice cream and make a go of it in let me see, the 80s in Ontario, then yeah, I'm a
I'm
goat.
sorry, did you say make a goat of it?
I did say that. Make a goat of it. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it's interesting, and meeting you this morning and hearing that we both had experiences with, actually in your case, short-term death, in my case, looking at the pearly gates because of a heart virus. We're just talking about how really precious life is. I certainly feel filled with gratitude, and these experiences make one very, very tough. And certainly the last 10 years with my brother Toller's estate has required every ounce of toughness and skill and resilience and thick skin and persistence and commitment. And I won't quit till this is done that I could ever possibly manage. And I think having had an encounter briefly, happily, with the Grim Reaper and the Pearly Gates some years ago was probably a step on this road. I think without all these experiences, I'm not sure that I would have been able to get through. So yes, my background as a goat farmer, university professor, filmmaker, film producer, eclectic kind of background like most of us have, definitely made me understand when Toller died of a massive heart attack in 2015 that it was up to me to ensure that his legacy was established in Canada. I believe without the slightest doubt that he is a great Canadian, not because of his achievements in figure skating and painting, although that's certainly part of it, but because he demonstrated throughout his life an absolute commitment to being authentic, which wasn't so easy for a gay man back in the 70s and 80s. He had the most prodigious work ethic of anyone I've ever met in my entire life. He spent every waking minute of every day being creative. He would have described it exactly like that, that being creative, producing, working harder to get better, to master skills and techniques was what he lived by. And anyway, I knew that it would be my job to ensure that Canada remembers that, remembers the courage, remembers the authenticity, remembers the creativity. And so that has resulted in this book. And people have been describing it as a labor of love, and that's not how I would characterize it. I would say that it's a labor of incredible pride and a fierce desire that Canada recognize and think of my brother in terms of really outstanding excellence, a life incredibly well lived, where every aspect of his creativity and his being he would push to the limits, and he pushed through unbelievable challenges at every stage of his life. I'm extremely proud of that. And I'm very happy to say that the book is doing incredibly well. I have a wonderful publisher in Sutherland House out of Toronto, a Canadian publisher of nonfiction, which is exactly where this book belongs. And it's doing extremely well with the skating community, of course, with taller fans across the country, with the artistic community and the performing arts community. And I think the reason that it's doing so well is because Toller's life resonated with people. They saw him even when they never met him, but they knew the battles that he fought as a skater. They knew that he was pushing against authority, that he was doing what was right, and that he was impacting the sport of figure skating, certainly, but he impacted the lives of Canadians. So although he had a flamboyant, over-the-top personality, it was a persona that he created, but underneath it all, he was just a regular Canadian kid with
Yeah.
a.
Yeah. Is that the book over your right shoulder?
Yes.
Why don't you show it to the audience?
I'd be happy to. So this is the book. It's hardcover, 280 pages. What's incredible about the book is that I knew when I started that although I have experience and expertise as a writer, I would never presume to write about the politics of figure skating judging or where my brother's art fits in the world of contemporary art, or I certainly wouldn't presume to expound on LGBT issues, and that I couldn't do that. I don't have the experience or the knowledge. I could write about Toller as a little boy. I could write about his place in Mexico. I could write about the impact that he had on many people. But what I did was reach out to people who did have the authority, the experience, the wisdom, to the credibility to write about politics and figure skating, or about art, or about LGBT, or about some of these things. And along the way, it occurred to me this was a very clever idea because people, if they were in the book, they would want a copy of the book. And that's how I imagined it would get distributed. But so along the way, there are more than 150 people who've contributed their perspectives and their experiences with Toller. And they range from his Mexican staff at his property in Mexico to world and Olympic champions to everybody in between. And I think it wasn't me trying to say my brother's life was like this or like that, or it followed this path. It was all these perspectives from all these different people that came together to produce a kind of mosaic or a kind of embroidery that gives a much richer, fuller picture of my brother's life. So this is the book. It's
So,
beautiful.
yes. So I was in a writers group yesterday evening, and the person who was doing the presentation said certain books can't get written, especially memoir type books, until certain people have passed. There's just too much, I guess, fighting against the river. And this seems like it might have been in that
Yeah,
category.
I'm sure that he would have micromanaged this to death and everybody would have gotten furious with him and the project would have died. So in some ways, although he was only 65 when he died of a massive heart attack, um, it gave me and the people that skated with him, competed with him, bought his paintings. All of us we haven't lost so many marbles yet that we can't comment. So I think that it's actually made this book possible. It's come out at exactly the right time.
Mm-hmm. So hit, I guess, Toller's height of his skating career, and I think I read that he was the first openly gay skater. I
He was
think there's
never
a
openly gay.
no. Okay.
He never ever spoke of it, and he wouldn't. I don't, that's not exactly right. I mean, he wrote about the odd fling, the odd affair that he had, so it wasn't something
Mm-hmm.
hidden. For him, it 100% wasn't important and didn't define who he was. And what I
Mm-hmm.
found in my travels and research for this book over the last 6 or 7 years was that people would say, Toller gave me the courage to come out. Toller gave me the courage to be who I was. Although Toller was never openly out, he was definitely a gay man and he was a gay icon. And in fact, his art now is and the book is having huge success with an LGBT population. I think because of this emphasis on being who you are and working to be who you are and never quitting, that message resonates.
Did you know you've mentioned his heart attack a
Mhm.
few times now? Did you know he was sick? Did he know
No,
he was sick?
no, he was a kind of drama queen, and it was always, oh, something was, dreadful or whatever, or he was broke, or this was going to happen, or that hadn't happened, or he couldn't pay his rent. So the last couple of days before he actually died, he was complaining about pain and chest pain, but it was all very dramatic. And of course, every single person in San Miguel, Mexico, where he lived, said, well, I take you to the hospital, we'll go right now. And he would say, no, no, no. So according to the coroner in Mexico, his heart just blew up in his studio. He had this huge heart attack. He fell, cracked his head on the corner of a table as he fell. There was no bleeding. He was dead before he hit the floor. It was just simply a massive heart attack. And I write in the book that the last Cranston to die of a massive heart attack was my grandfather in 1930 something, who died of a huge heart attack. But there's not a history of heart disease in the family, and Toller had definitely not been sick. His staff says he was painting furiously the last few weeks, but he did that every day of his life.
Mm-hmm. Did he have a particular painting style?
Yeah, very much so. Anybody who's ever seen his work would recognize it. And one of the great things about him as an artist is his distinctive style. He called it magic realism. There's something whimsical, something magical, something otherworldly about it, but it's certainly not abstract and it's not landscape and it's not realism in any kind of way. He would say that, and he did say that his skating travels, which took him all over the world, took him
Mm-hmm.
especially to Russia, where he spent gazillion hours in museums and galleries, not just in
Sure.
Russia, but in France, everywhere, absorbing the works of the masters and absorbing the folk tales and the legends in Russia. So there's a very clear Russian influence in his color palette and some of his imagery, which would have come from folk tales and from his own exposure to art in Russia, plus, of course, the opulence of the czarist palaces and so on. There's something over the top about the gowns, the crowns, the decorative aspects of his painting. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not, just a very distinctive style. He created a world. It came absolutely out of his head or out of his soul. He said himself many times he had no idea where it came from. It was just always there from the time he was a little boy. And you can see paintings that he did as a 7, 8, 10-year old, and stylistically they relate to what he was doing in his 60s.
So, as the executor of his estate, do you have like a back catalog of his art that hasn't been released yet?
Well, that's interesting. In a way, yes. I think um, the balance of the paintings. He was an incredible salesman, and he sold everything he did almost as soon as he did it. That said, there were
Mm-hmm.
still 400 and some paintings on the property when he passed away. So those have been dispersed to several galleries, and now the collection is owned and maintained by Art Evolution, Christopher Talbot, and his Art Evolution Gallery. Chris Talbot handled Toller's work for 20 years or so before he died, and he's acquired the rights to all the remaining paintings and the intellectual property. And he has big plans over the next 5 to 10 years to take Toller and the brand internationally. And right now, as we speak, there's a show of Toller's work in Australia, in southern Australia, outside Adelaide. And Toller, of course, is an utterly unknown artist in Australia, unknown skater, unknown person. But the work has appeal and it's selling quite well.
So, where is this gallery or
It's
facility?
at the Darrenburg Cube Winery in southern Australia.
Mhm. No, the person who's distributing it,
Oh, Chris
managing it.
Talbot. He
Just tell me.
he has a gallery in Cochrane, Alberta. It's called Art Evolution, and he
I have a
has
buddy in Cochrane, Alberta.
oh, there you go. It's a small world. But
Mhm.
his business, his art business is and has been for decades now international and a lot of it online. So he has collectors all over the world and he does a lot of business online through the paintings are listed online. Right now he's based in Australia, but he travels, so he'll be in Canada in the next month or two.
Cool. I just remembered I have an acquaintance who also published through Sutherland, Phyllis Taylor. So,
Yeah,
uh,
that's Ken White is the publisher at Sutherland, and he's just absolutely stellar.
yeah, he ran like McLean's or
That's
something, did
right.
he
Yes, he
not?
did. He was the editor at Maclean's and also Saturday Night, and he was the first editor of the National Post. And he
Mhm.
took on this very difficult challenge of being a publisher at this time in the world of publishing. It's very, very difficult in 2017, but Sutherland House is doing well, and they're publishing more titles every year.
Mhm. Do you have another book in?
Funny you should ask. Yes, absolutely. This first book is a biography. So it's about Toller's life. It has a little boy, the history of the Cranstons and the Toller, the name, which goes very, very deep into the roots of Canada. We're related to Sir Leonard Tilley, who was the father of Confederation, connections to the last spike in the National Bank, and all of that.
Mhm.
And on my mother's side, my great great grandfather owned the estate that Stonehenge is on. So those roots come from England. Anyway, so it's a biography. But the next book that will come out, and again, Sutherland House will publish it in the fall, I hope by November, will be just on Toller's artworks. So this book is 100,000 words of text and billions of photos. The next one will be very, very much concentrated on his artworks, not just the paintings, although that's the biggest part of it, but he designed light fixtures. He painted on leather jackets. He designed upholstery fabric. He had rugs woven by Mexican weavers from the city of Oaxaca. He did a lot of artistic things with his own design, but in media other than oil. And
Mhm.
so that this book that will come out in the fall is about that. We'll display that and promote that.
Sounds like I met you like 20 years too late, and that I could have had a lot of really cool stuff if we had been buddies.
Well, we are buddies now, and I think because we both had some heart experiences, we have an extra connection. And
Yes,
taller
that's
too,
true.
as far as that goes, although he didn't live to tell the tale. We've had another chance.
Okay. So we also have another connection, and it's sort of a Winnipeg connection. And now my PR guy, Miles Shane, came to you through Brenley Carrington Temple,
That's right.
um, who I've met once or twice when I still lived in Winnipeg. How did that all come to be that Taller was friends with Brenley?
Brenly met Toller when she was 14. She's fond of telling this story. And
Mm-hmm.
she had, as a obviously precocious and talented teenager, had a radio show. And
Mm-hmm.
Toller was coming through Winnipeg. He would have been 10, 15 years older. He was coming
Mm-hmm.
through Winnipeg with a skating show, and somehow or other, this young, ambitious radio host, Brenly, got to interview Toller, and that started a friendship that lasted until now, until this day. And along the way, Brenly and her husband acquired quite a number of Toller's paintings, so they became very serious collectors of his work. But she's always been an admirer and a fan. And when the book came out, she has a piece in the book. She's one of the 150 contributors. She has a really lovely piece towards the end of the book. She invited me to come to Winnipeg, and uh, and that's what I did. There was a
Had
book
you met
signing
her?
chapters. Yeah, I had not actually. Feels like we've known each other forever. I met her at Toller's memorial service at the Art Gallery of Ontario at the AGO in 2015, and she had made a very generous contribution to the Toller Cranston Memorial Fund with the Canadian Olympic Foundation. But we've corresponded back and forth and had Zoom calls and so on. But she's just one of those people that I feel like I've known forever. Technically, I haven't.
Mhm. Her and her family have done a lot of very generous things in the
Yes.
Winnipeg community. So, sort of on the down low. Sorry to out you, Brenley. But thanks for everything that you've done. So, I'm trying to think. How about a little bit about you? Because you've also had like this incredible artistic background. And you're a filmmaker, you're now an author, soon to be twice published. You've probably penned, dozens of academic papers that only a select few in your field will ever read. Um, but so where do you think all this talent in your family comes from? I know you've got
Well,
two brothers. Do they are they also talented as well?
yeah, but you know what? I absolutely believe that everybody is talented. Some people just never discover it. And I've written in the book, I don't know how my parents, who were incredibly ordinary, normal, decent, good, middle class parents, we went to Sunday school and we did our chores and we took out the dog and we brought home reasonable report cards. That was just expected. But I think they somehow made all of us feel that we could be whoever we wanted to be, that you just needed to work hard and you needed to aspire and you needed to stick your neck out and you needed to get stuff done. And so I just feel like I always had the freedom to do what I wanted to do. I went to university. I my mother lied about my age when I was in kindergarten. And so by the time I finished high school at age 14 or 15, I think, because we'd moved from Ontario to Quebec and I gained a year there because the school system was different. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
by the time I was 19, I was teaching university, or 20 maybe, University of Western Ontario. I taught film. I did a degree at Queen's. I went off to UCLA and did a master's degree in film, and all of that was finished before I was 21. And then I was teaching university. Um, but you just aspire and you go after things and you fail and you pick up the pieces and you move on, which is pretty good lessons for life. That's what I've done.
My mom has a cousin, and he's the dean emeritus at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, of the art school there, and he's sort of the same mindset. He thinks everybody, no matter how good or bad you are, your talent is your talent, and you should exercise it. So, shout out to cousin Marvin,
Yes,
um,
cousin
and
Marvin, you're right.
he's amazing. Everybody in my family seems to have some artistic talent except for me. So,
Well, I'm not sure that that's true.
okay, please say more.
Well, did you approve that poster that's behind your head? Because it's stunning.
Yes, that was made by my publisher in just outside of San Antonio, Texas. Um, I think his name is David King, is their artist. I had sort of sketched up a more morbidy, I'll loosely say sketched up, of a hand coming out of a grave. And on the headstone, it was like a heart rhythm flatlining and stuff like that. And David thought it was too other genre. It would be more horror.
Well, yeah, it's almost too sort of pedantic, but this one is kind of brilliant. So good choice.
Mhm. I didn't like it at first, and then it sort of grew on me. So.
Well, it's funny because it's a single strong image, and now I'm beginning to learn a bit about this. Everybody does stuff on their phone, and so to have something that's remotely complicated or multifaceted, an image on for books these days is not
Mhm.
is not very effective. But a cover like yours would stand out. You could see it 50 feet away in a chapters, and the same with the taller cover, which to me is amazing because this picture is like 50 years old and
Mhm.
there's still something very identifiable about the pose. That was Ken White's idea. I had a different idea that would have been stupid, although at the time I thought it was brilliant. Anyway, he made very, very good decisions.
Well, it's an interesting picture of Toller. So I'm guessing his peak was like in the mid to late 70s, right?
Yeah,
And I was junior highish. So I knew of him. I didn't, but it's interesting that the picture you chose is him with his blades on the ice,
That's right.
when
We
he
knew,
was known for his leaps and jumps.
well, what I love about this is just if the book designer Robert Hughes, who's just a genius, if you move this picture down or left or right or whatever, it completely changes. But this way, it sort of look at me, and that was
Hmm.
very much taller. There's something just something kind of extravagant and fabulous about it.
Hmm.
Anyway, I like it. But we knew that the primary audience for this book, at least initially, would be the skating community, skaters over the age of 50 who knew what huge impact he had on the sport back in the day. And you're right, it was the 70s. That was when he was at his peak. He won his Olympic medal 50 years ago. In 2026, the next Olympics will be the 50th anniversary of him winning an Olympic medal. So yeah, the skating, the thread for this book to get it out there is through the skating world, and through them it's going then to younger generations, which is great.
You have his medals and all.
No, I have absolutely no idea what happened to them. They weren't among his things in Mexico. I know before he left Toronto, he had a home on Berkeley Street, I think, in Cabbage Town, and he was furious and disgusted at some point and threw all his costumes out on the street. But there are a lot of ladies of the night, shall we say, and queens of various descriptions in that area. So there was this mad frenzy over his garbage pile, and his sequins and his chiffons and stuff were taken off to be transformed into other costumes for shows. So there wasn't a lot of skating memorabilia left. And when he left
Mhm.
Canada for Mexico in 1992, he took his skates and his paints and he announced to the world that he was going to live as a minimalist and he was going to focus on his painting. But he didn't. He did
Mhm.
instead, he did. See if I can just find him. Well, if you see the book, there were 18,000 things on his property here. There's a picture.
Oh, wow.
So that's his living room. That was the patio walkway. This very magical property, but it was incredibly encumbered, shall
Mhm.
we say.
Do you still have the property?
No, the property was sold. It extended from one street to another, so it was severed. The bottom half was sold, the top half was sold. The story and the convoluted criminality, graft extortion, corruption that went on with dismantling those properties will be a major motion picture someday. Too long a
Hmm.
story for this, but no, the property's been sold, and one half of it now is a parking lot, which is just extraordinary. It's
Yeah.
simply hideous, but kind of fabulous. And the other part is a spectacular, multi-story, ultra-modern, fabulous home that has a few elements left from Toller's day. But where Toller disappeared to in San Miguel was 18,000 things were dispersed throughout the city to different homes and hotels and restaurants, and much of it came back to Canada as well. So somebody said it's like organ transplants. We had a 7 week estate sale that went on 7 days a week, and all of that stuff's been dispersed. So there's little pieces of Toller in every second home in San Miguel de Allende, but his property um, has been transformed into something completely different.
Well, I find it fascinating when you go to somebody's home and there's like a very unique story behind, this piece of art or that piece of art or just something eclectic they acquired. So I wonder if any of those ladies of the evening or whoever, like I think uh, Cabbage Town is like Queen and
Yeah,
I'm forgetting,
Berkeley, Parliament, Carlton,
like
that
east of
area.
Young kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, if they know the gems they've acquired have been,
Oh, I
all
think they
over the
do.
world.
I think they
performed
do.
and
I think he was very well known in that area. He was legendary. I mean, as a outrageous artist. There's a plaque for Taller Cranston, Cabbage Town. Cabbage Town is very proud of the artists and writers that lived in that
Mhm.
area over the years, and a lot of them have a plaque, and Taller has one too.
Oh, I
Like
had no
Taller
idea.
Cranston lived here.
Well, Tourism Toronto
Yes, you can
appreciates
do
the
that. You
plug.
can do Canada's Walk of Fame. He has a star on the Walk of Fame. He
Oh,
acquired a
yes,
lot
I've
of
seen that.
awards.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. He holds an Order of Canada. He was a member of the Olympic Hall of Fame and the Sports Hall of Fame and the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame. And he has a pretty impressive list of achievements for his 65 years.
Hmm. It's fascinating. So we have less than 1 minute. I told you we were on a
Okay.
quick timeline. Anything really quick, and if we get cut off, I'll just ask you to log in again so we can finish up. But anything you want to plug besides the book,
Well,
or
I think people will see a lot of themselves in the book and will be re-inspired and reinvigorated to pursue their own path. That is my hope, and I think it will happen. So I encourage people to look for it. It's available from Amazon, any of the local retailers, Chapters Indigo, and of course from Sutherland House in Toronto from the publisher.
Philippa, thank you. This has been fascinating, and I wish we could talk a little bit more. Maybe we'll. So we have less than 1 minute. I told you we were on a
Okay.
quick timeline. Anything really quick, and if we get cut off, I'll just ask you to log in again so we can finish up. But anything you want to plug besides the book,
Well,
or
I think people will see a lot of themselves in the book and will be re-inspired and reinvigorated to pursue their own path. That is my hope, and I think it will happen. So I encourage people to look for it. It's available from Amazon, any of the local retailers, Chapters Indigo, and of course from Sutherland House in Toronto from the publisher.
Philippa, thank you. This has been fascinating, and I wish we could talk a little bit more. Maybe we'll. And once again, I have gone over my allotted time and rudely cut off my very interesting guest before we had a proper finish. So, Philippa, please tell us what's next and coming up and how people can get hold of you.
Oh, thank you, Fred. What's next for me? I'm going to Lake Placid in a couple of weeks. Lake Placid is a pretty important city for Toller. It's a figure skating center, and Toller spent a lot of summer skating there, and it was really from there that he made the decision to move to Toronto and join up with his coach, Ellen Burka, with whom he traveled for the rest of his competitive career. Anyway, there's an incredibly supportive community there, and they want to do something for Toller in October. So between now and then, I am working to make presentations on the book. Yesterday, I was at a retirement residence just in Ottawa, which was fabulous because all of the people were familiar with Toller and had been outraged by how he was cheated by the judges. And there's talk about going to BC in early August. I'm not sure. So there are a lot of plans up in the air, but my focus is to get the art book out, as I described earlier, to promote the current book, Ice Paint Passion, wherever I can, and to continue meeting wonderful Canadians like you. I've loved meeting you this morning, Fred. It's been great.
Back at you. So, yeah, I guess that's something you said you didn't really touch on in the book. And I know we're supposed to be closing, but I think in figure skating, much like gymnastics, there's sort of this, this is the group we kind of like, and we're the traditionalist judges and, stuff like that. And, I guess he was the general understanding I get is Toller was a better free skater than doing compulsories. And people often say now, why are there even compulsories? If you're competing at this level, you know, you've obviously got the basics, down pat.
Well, I think he's partly responsible for the fact that the figures were just abolished. There haven't been figures or compulsory figures in figure skating since 1990, I think.
Mhm.
And partly that was because of Toller and the other free skaters who were dazzling to the audiences, and the audiences certainly couldn't watch and didn't watch the figures. Anyway, he
Mhm.
was important in changing the sport in many ways. That's one.
And hopefully it'll change things for gymnastics and similar sports that get judged.
Yeah, judge sports, even boxing, are always difficult. There's always controversy.
Yeah, boxing, MMA. However, the Stanley Cup playoffs are on right now, and
Go Oilers.
wow, if there was anybody in the NHL, I think that could have been a figure skater because of the way he uses his edges on his blades and stuff. Connor McDavid. Wow, what
Yeah,
a
that's a really
what a
interesting
wizard.
observation. Yes, exactly.
Maybe Sidney Crosby, but I don't think Sidney's. I don't think he has that lean, long look that they look for in the skaters. He's a little. They call him Quadzilla. What a way to end an interview. Talking
Okay,
about
this has been
Sydney's
great.
thighs. Thank you
Well,
so much for
no,
coming on.
thank you. It's a pleasure.
And to everybody who tuned in, thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of the Dead Man Walking podcast. Bye bye.
Thanks, Fred.
You're welcome.